Okay, so continuing with our schedule today, I have the great pleasure of introducing our next speaker, José M Calderón. He is Argentinian, he's psychiatrist, master and therapist in past life therapist. Has one test technician configuration on systemic. He also helps in the administration of technological implements. He's a Reiki master, Hisui, Tibetan Hisui. He also works with Akashic studies. Jose Manuel, hello, it's a pleasure. Good afternoon for people who are in other countries. Thank you very much for the introduction, for the invitation, for this first center of past life therapists to the organization. We are all here and all the effort that you're putting into it, so this tool on past life therapy can expand everywhere in the world, and also we can reunite online through the network and participate in these events that make me so proud and emotionates, fills me with emotion, and my soul keeps on growing. Thank you for the invitation. And as I was hearing previous speaker, me that I come from the psychiatry branch, what was told before by the work that is organized by Viviana, the consultation motives that we all usually hear is insomnia. So this also helps a lot from the point of view of transpersonal point of view. So we can also remember a little bit of how abstain ourselves from the use of medication. So very, very good on all the information that is transmitted through this research. So the topic that we are going to talk about today, the symposium, well, I was feeling it a little bit. So the title of my presentation is Through the Integration of the Fragmented Soul. What does that mean? And I took this from the point of view of my own personal growth, from how did I get here from the place where I am right now. And everything started by imagining, and I saw this in a speech of Roberto Vicio, that how I expanded into the planet from this, and I imagine this from my soul and the soul from everyone here. Since we are born, or before being born in the womb, we're born when we turn 1, 2, 5 years old, and that timeline that we are creating. And on each point of that line, everything that is happening, they mark us on our lives. Sometimes something nice, things that are not good, something that traumatizes, and in some way that makes us so we can move to a discovery, to a vision. So we can integrate those bits that stayed in somewhere fragmented, so we can connect them to our past, to our origin. So I'm going to try to be in the most kind that I can this speech. So see how with the resources of the past life therapy in my own experience that this work has for all of us. When I was proposed this invitation, I started feeling what did I want, and an alignment with my soul that everything's got a purpose, everything's got a meaning, even though sometimes our soul and our mind sometimes doesn't understand very good, but our soul always knows. It's not a chance to being reborn, or where do we choose our family when we experiment different experiences that our soul chooses, traumatic, not fair. Some usually we are constantly we're looking for the ways of pain relief, suffer relief. We spend an enormous psychic energy amount looking for parts of ourselves. In the present, many of us feel incomplete. We don't feel totally here. Sometimes we feel as fulfill as we can, and we take conscious when we take conscious about this, and we want to get the full meaning of life and the integrity that sometimes at some point we enjoyed, and now we only have a picture of what it was. We want to go home feeling whole with plenitude, with the people that we care about. So the meaning of this conference is the ways of the soul, which are crucial parts that give life and vitality. So we can understand each other. There is an understanding dialect of what happens every day to our souls. We we walk into our beliefs and paradigms, and the past life therapy is a new paradigm. The regression therapy is a tool of healing. When usually we don't understand the intrinsic mechanics of how it works, but we do understand the effects. I am at peace. In harmony. I feel myself. A part of me came back. I feel good. I don't have more fear no more. And so we can understand how the soul gets fragmented. I think it's important to understand how the regressive therapy and the PLT, and this is the switch, the turn that I think is necessary for it on its understanding on the way to the integration. And these concepts are based on what the soul represents, temporality of the soul, the catchability of the world, the multi simultaneously fragmentation and loss of energy. And also, how did I came out of all of this so it can come back to a whole again? Jose Luis Caboli, I've studied with him, and that's where my paradigm changed to the formation, because we come from a construction, from a mind, with a mind, a dual mind. And the concept associated with the physical body, we are very much identified with the linear time. The body gets old, and that also makes you feel the past of time. That internal feeling, Jose Luis calls it the subjective time. And the time that we measure with our clocks and our calendars, he determines that at the objective time. So the soul, before the start of a physical body, the soul moves in an area with no time, where time and space is only one thing. For the soul, the time doesn't exist, and it's also not exact to speak about past lives or successive lives, even though we can understand it that way. If we talk about the physical time, we can understand what we are talking about. When we talk about past lives, we also talk about the physical body associated to the concept of the body lifespan, and we given them a name. We have identified when the body dies, we say that life is over. But for the soul, it's not about the past lives or successive lives or future lives, but only one life. But for moments, it happens on time, in the no time space, and sometimes in our physical space. physical body. When the linear time disappears, the lives are not past or successive, they are simultaneous. Everything is happening here and now at the same time, and everything together. What happens is to live an experience in the physical plane, you need time. But when you're living that experience, the rest of the experiences that have been lived by the soul, and even that have not been lived yet, are here now, coexisting at the same time, everything at the same time, simultaneously. And this correlation with time, and I heard Roberto, he spoke very well about what happens in a quantic way in the existence of time, and how you reach to a bigger understanding of how you can understand this bigger dimension. The temporality of the soul takes us to what we talk about, the entrapment of the soul, things that cannot be able, were not able to be solved at what point. They create an entrapment, and the entrapment of the conscious. Like José also talk about conscious that he's like a synonym, and this also worth for the past life and the present time. When there's no time and it doesn't resolve the event, the original event, the soul gets entrapped in an unfinished experience, generally determined by a moment or a traumatic experience. Sometimes the body dies in a past life, but for this, because of for the soul, the time doesn't exist. The experience continues, as is what's happening right now. When the body dies, the soul still is experiencing the pain, but stays without the necessary tool to process what is happening. When the soul splits from the body, the sensations continue because it couldn't finish it while it was on the body. And now I cannot walk apart of it because the feelings and the thoughts on the soul are energy. Also, as the soul is in a no time dimension, the body died, but the experience continues. And maybe there's been 2,000 years on the earth time, but for the soul, there's not even 1 second passed. The experience has not finished yet, but the soul's still there. The conscience is stuck on an instant that becomes an eternal present. Time does not exist, and when a traumatic event happens, it's impossible to feel and to be conscious everything that is happening, and everything that you are feeling is caught on the panic, on the pain, on the rage, on no defense. Many things are happening at the same time, so you can to recognize what is happening on your body level or mental level, and that's what then creates the entrapment. The only way that the soul has to process multiple sensations is to go back into a body and to feel in that body everything that it couldn't finish in the body that died. So there you get the different symptoms, emotional symptoms, because the soul needs to complete, to finish the original experience. So the body reproduce on their new body, the soul producing this new body, the experience that did not finish. And this can be manifested by different symptoms: anguish, pain, blockage. The body dies, but the conscious is grabbed to the pain to survive. It cannot tell that the body died. The conscious in the soul, it's happening. So it also reproduce on the pain, on the actual body, the pain on an unconscious level. He thinks that stop feeling pain could mean that one is dead. And then we move to a different subject, the simultaneously. That means that when the conscious is caught in many different experiences, it is happening at the same time, and they have not finished yet. So it might happen that while I'm speaking now, one part of me is drowning, one part of me is burning, one part of me had an accident or has something stick in my heart. All of these experiences that have not finished yet, and in which the soul or the conscious are caught, are responsible of many of the symptoms that we experience in our daily life. The fear of speaking in public, the phobia of closed spaces, the fear of swimming at the sea, the impossibility of going into a ship or a boat, or open the way of we cannot express how we feel, the manifestation of an unfinished experience in which we are caught without knowing. That also drives us and takes us to a different phenomena, which ends with the entrapment of the conscious, gives us this sensation that it cannot be processed, and they give origin to the symptoms on our daily life. And this fragmentation of that energy. Soul is pure energy, is our vital force. As the soul is energy, when a part of it gets stuck in a traumatic event, there's also an energy entrapment. Every experience in which we are caught implies necessarily energy entrapment, and that is the same as fragmentation. And the result of these fragments is in somehow that we lost the integrity of our soul, and each fragment contains trapped energy that is not available to our daily life. And also you are suffering symptoms from experiences that are unsolved and also experiencing in a presence. And we don't have all the vital energy to which we could have access to. In fact, the energy is within us, but it's trapped, it's blocked, we cannot use it. It's like we saw the energy battery, but we can't have access to it. And that's the queen of all therapies, that is called by. We have the key to go open that door and get back that energy. And this drives us to get out of this trapment. When the experience that provokes these events and the therapeutic work consists in reviving that experience as it was there. It's necessary to reproduce the original event on the actual body, to give the soul the opportunity to do everything that it couldn't do in its moment. It implies experimentation, expressing, and even in a visceral way, all the reactions of the thoughts on an energetic level. That's what Jose Luis called the fraction, to experiment and to force the body and to force into the body all the internal experiences that usually you don't have conscious of. That means to feel on the body everything that has to be felt as painful as it can be. And it's also a phrase that is always reminds me that I rather 2 hours of pain and expression of pain to a whole life of pain. What happens? Gonna
I'm gonna drink some water. Okay. What happens in the fragmentation and the loss when this entrapment happens? Very painful situations that are bearable, a part of the soul. Sometimes it's out of the physical body to avoid feeling that sensations and to avoid the traumatic response. The soul comes back to the body, it reintegrates, and sometimes it doesn't. Some opportunities, those fragments that get out, decide to stay out of the body because it's painful or dangerous to feel part of the pain. The part that goes out and is entrapped decides to stay out of the body, and then many things can happen. Part of the soul that separates from the body can convert in an autonomous fragment that doesn't evolve with the rest of their components. It can happen that the soul fragment can stay indefinitely in the place where the traumatic event happened. Maybe that fragment can come back to their origin, to their light, and doesn't want to come back because they are right. They feel good. Maybe it can get lost in another dimension and doesn't or can't come back. It is impossible. Or sometimes that part of the soul, it's in another dimension and in the atemporal plane, and maybe it can happen that is entrapped by other spiritual entities. Many things can happen when the soul is fragmented. As you say, the soul and the body, and the fragmentation, the soul gets in a temporal fragmentation as a consequence of separating from the body, and it gets in a temporal state. The fragment that slot stays in the age when the separation happens. For example, let's say a child, a 5-year-old child, is abused by their parents, and when it happened, a part of the child gets out of the body so that it doesn't feel the pain and the abuse, and it doesn't come back to it. Now that person is 45, and that fragment of the soul that is out is still 5 and behaves like so within the causes of the fragmentation or loss of the soul or the entrapment. The main cause is that we would say it happens. Maybe these traumas have maximum intensity, sexual abuse, physical abuse, physical punishments. Many times when we lose a loved one, when we feel abandoned, where our parents separate, in divorces, and accidents, and serious diseases, tortures, kidnaps, death threats, war experiences, and failures, in mm, in a coma state, we have a soul state, and in these cases, in 100% of the cases, we lose the soul so that it doesn't relieve the pain, so that it can still live. What causes the loss of the vital essence? Many times before, the origin from the soul loss comes from shamanism. The soul got lost because of a scare, or it was stolen. And the basic premise, it says that when we have a trauma, part of our vital essence separates from ourselves so that it can survive that experience and to get away from all the impact and the pain. What composes a trauma varies from one person to another, and the fragmentation of the soul can be originated from any traumatic experience. What is traumatic for one person cannot be for another. In this psychiatry, which I'm trained in the causes of traumatic stress, we struggle to define. We have classification manuals of diseases where we can have a PTSD when we finish the visit. When, within those requirements, there's one that puts the person as the one that is expressing Because if a person considers that it has had a trauma that is valid, what are the signs and the symptoms, the clinical manifestations of the soul loss? When a person gets fragmented because of a traumatic event, in some way they lose energy. The immediate effect in which that person is incomplete in their integrity, in their energetic integrity. They lose their strength, their power, they're weak. They don't have a will. They could have a chronic fatigue. They could be more vulnerable for diseases. They feel empty and the feeling of not being complete. That is a symptom. Also, when diminishing the vital energy, we diminish the natural protection of energy that we all have, and that is the invasion and the psychic field in disincarnated entities that we know as lost soul. We don't know how the loss of a part of a soul happens. We don't even know how a person can still live when they're so fragmented. And then Jose Luis Scavulli gives a theoretical explanation where we could understand that the loss of the soul could be considered as the conservation of energy law in 1845. Every time an energy disappears in a place, an equivalent amount has to appear in another place in the same system. How are we with time? Good. Now I'm gonna give some examples of fragmentation and what I could collect in my experience as a therapist, in which the same words from my patients, I'm gonna translate them in this moment. One of the patients in a relationship with physical abuse, my patient had the conscious of being entrapped in destructive patterns. She would feel weak, defenseless, like she couldn't escape. And there was a moment in that relationship in which she could feel that a part of herself was with her that partner. And when she got separated, that eventually it happened, and that where we see the fragmentation. A part of what she says. A part of me is still with him, and there we could work in the therapeutical process in the regression so that we could get back that fragment, that part of the soul that somehow it got in a, it remained in another person. The soul can also be fragmented when children don't feel loved, they feel abandoned by their parents or any circumstance or situation. One of my patients commented that we could detect that the soul fragmentation was due to the continuous yell and discussions of the parents and the abuse that he received because of that. And a part of his soul was in that room, in that place. And he described like it's like cuddled, it's quiet, it doesn't want to come back, it's scared still. And with that process of regression, we could reintegrate that fragment with him. And the soul can be also fragmented when you have a fall a concussion and you hit your head and the soul can abandon the body to be able to survive the physical and sexual abuse when a traumatized person escapes literally to survive the painful experience. A disease can also cause soul loss, and the disease is it can occupy a part when they feel the personal control and their own existence. When we see traumatic event, we mean the shock. Shock is the word that we use to describe when we've had the experience of suffering something at an extreme level due to why one part of us seem to go from the conscious reality. When we see the fragmentation, the part of the that's failed to come back, reasons we don't understand why. And as I said, it can happen that many things happened and that it stays on the atemporal part that they're entrapped in the conscious. And
Other important assumptions that some patients have told to me is the importance of the memory. I work with many patients that say to me, Doctor, I can't remember when I was from 5 to 7, 10 to 11, and then the manifestation of the loss of the fragmentation may happen. So, in order so you don't relieve that, it gets entrapped, that sensation, and in a conscious level, we cannot perceive. Another symptom, depression, lack of energy, vitality. Sometimes you walk roads, exploring many times, filling those spaces, those emptiness places, to feel well and give good experience, to give purpose. Also, the fragmentation happens after a divorce or a death. After a death, there's a pain period that is normal, and when the person is not able to overcome that loss, the soul can get fragmented. And also, I hear this in my patients that they say, a part of me left with the dead one. Physical disease also may happen when you lose control of the same body. What are the also the manifestations? I'm not here. One part of me is watching, but I can't connect with my emotions. This describes a person who is in a dissociation. The dissociation is this separation of whole segments of our personality. It's a part of our conscience. Am I resolved with feelings of feeling awkward or with feelings of depersonalization? In a way, most of us experiment a degree of soul loss and independently on the trauma, regardless of trauma, the person I know, people I know, they feel no connection or disconnected with life. The recovery of the fragment of the soul is useful for those who want to improve the connection with themselves, with their loved ones, and with the earth. And with this, makes do a summary of what I consider as the fragmentation and one of the keys of the past life therapies and the resource of the regressive therapy. After you get back the fragments of your soul and you can integrate yourself and you can walk towards it using the resources that each of us obtains along the way and the way each of us process as long as you can, as you could. On my way, in the regressive therapy and the past life therapy has been a complement. of integration to my life. I wouldn't be here talking now if it weren't for all of this moment, for this part, for this, I would say, this sensation, this intuition that my soul needed to move onto and walk through this experience so I could come back and reunite all of these pieces that were excluded outside of my consciousness until this international congress. I always say around there that to get to where I am had to be more with this intuitive part of my soul, the growth, the research of these feelings, of the sensations, the emptiness that sometimes I feel and I have felt. There are still things that I need to integrate. The integration is a process that we all have, at least in this experience of life. As we can, if we cannot reintegrate, we can't evolve and continue to complete ourselves. I stay thinking. That's a very interesting questions here. When one has had an traumatic event, as you were saying, can that person willingly will get back that lost fragment, or necessarily it has to be done on this therapy? What happens is, in a traumatic event, the conscious is excluded, it's unconsciously. So you have to, well, you can look for it with techniques, meditation techniques, entering in a deep state. You can experiment or dive into your unconscious. If if it's possible, yes, it is. But we have some points that we ourselves we feel we don't have the ability to move forward because we think it's painful, or because our soul doesn't want to live that again. So that's when you need to ask for help, and that's when the past life therapy or regressive therapy guides us towards. But also this question is interesting because when in a way the patient on the session is the one who is in the search for the fragmented soul. As a therapist, in a way, I let myself be guided by the patient's soul. I let him his soul to guide him so he can discover where it was fragmented, where it was excluded from the conscious, where was it trapped. It's actually the same patient that carried me, his own soul to the discovery. Oh, sorry, I cannot hear. Yes, we have other two questions related to these fragments, of course, that they get lost. What happened with this fragment? Where does it go? Where does it stay? And also, once that you reintegrate it, how does it integrate with the other parts? Okay. The soul, when it gets fragmented, it's in a state of no time. The soul needs from the physical body so it can relive that experience. It might be with us, but it's excluded. It's like we have that vital energy, but we don't have the availability. It's on a no time space. As the soul and the time and the space does not exist, it needs from the body so it can express it. So it express it on this body through symptoms. And what is the other question? Oh, I couldn't hear you. The question is, where do these fragmented fragments, where they are they and how do they integrate back again? So the reintegration process, it has to be with, had to do with when one take conscious and brings those excluded parts of our conscious, those fragmented parts are reincorporated into our personality or our way of being. It's like the intrinsic process of how it gets fragmented is a little bit unknown. What happens is that there's a traumatic event, and that's what makes it to detach. So I might be excluded. The idea is to relive that traumatic event again to bring back that energy of what was excluded, and that's what starts to integrate into our personality in our ways, and results are seen by the effects of what the patient manifests. Literally, soul comes back to the body. I feel myself. I feel like a part of me is at peace. I feel that I am myself. It's like there's an integration. It's like that little piece enters to that part that was incomplete. It's like the therapeutic process takes to the integration of the personality itself. We are also asked, in the case of a traumatic death, what happens with these fragments? What happened? Sorry. What happened with these fragments? I didn't hear you quite well. What happened with these fragments in the case of a traumatic death? Well, in the case of a traumatic death, many times they could stay at the traumatic situation. For example, a 5-year-old kid that gets abused, the pieces of that soul stay on that place and that room, and at the same age where that happened, they stay in a temporal space. They maybe though one of some of those fragments of the soul might go to the light, and maybe they won't come back because they don't want to, because they feel well. Maybe those fragments of the soul might be caught or stolen by other entities, spiritual entities. Maybe it might happen that many things may happen. I'm thinking that when they stay in a timeless space, that you stay in a timeless space, in another dimension. And how many dimensions are we talking about? They stay in a timeless space. Any other question? We have many questions for tomorrow, so we can keep on talking about this very interesting topic, very basic on the therapeutic level. Okay, so we continue answering questions tomorrow? Or is there time to answer more questions? We have, I want to share with you a comment. It says, in the Old Testament, we hear from captivity time where where the soul stays, and that resonates with what you just said. Well, we thank you very much, uh, Calderon, for this very important speech. I hope you have it tomorrow at the round table. Yes, tomorrow I'm gonna be on the round table. I thank you very much for the invitation, and please continue enjoying this symposium. And in a way that integrates everywhere in the world to this healing, interpersonal healing therapy that helps so many people. I'm very thankful. Integrating fragments here. Thank you very much, doctor.